Jesus, thank you for what you're doing. Lord, I ask your blessing on all that we do tonight, and that you would just revolutionize the way that we think. I pray for that you would revolutionize the way that we think. And Lord, that we would just begin to think like you think. Amen. Somebody once said that we get saved when we believe in Jesus, but we get sanctified as we believe like Jesus. And so tonight is we're really working towards a revolution in our own hearts. Romans 3:23 says, "All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." And how many of you know that the standard in which God measures us by is not like that we're good, but that we're glorious? The reason why Jesus died on the cross wasn't to make us good, it was to make us glorious. How many of you know that? That the reason why Jesus died on the cross wasn't because we were bad, it wasn't because we weren't good, it was because we weren't glorious. All have sinned and fallen short of what? The glory of God. And so God isn't interested in making us good, He's interested in making us glorious. Do you know that? And tonight I want to talk a little bit about that. I'll just start with telling you an experience that I had. This has been about 3 weeks ago. And I've shared this with the school of ministry, but I really felt like it was something that we were supposed to do in the whole church. About 3 weeks ago, I was in my office, and Nancy, my secretary, and our assistant, Kathy and my assistant, came in, and she's kind of our armor bearer. She came into my office, and she said, "Can I speak to you for a few minutes?" I said, "Yeah, sure. You know, what's on your mind?" And she said, "Well," and we had this conversation, and after a few minutes, she said, "You know, sometimes your sense of humor hurts people's feelings. You know, just like I just did with Banning that didn't think about it until after I did it." And she goes, "You know, sometimes your sense of humor hurts people's feelings, and you don't realize it." And so we started this conversation, and I kind of looked in her eyes, and I could see a tear starting in one of her eyes, and I said, "Well, would that be like, did I hurt your feelings?" And she said, "Yeah, you know, you hurt my feelings, and I know you were just kidding." And then, you know, she said, "But it isn't just me, you know, you hurt people's feelings sometimes, and I know that you wouldn't be in your heart to do that, but you just don't realize that people really value you, and they value your words. And people she said, you don't realize, but a lot of people around this body, they live on the words that you speak to them. And when you're joking with them and you kind of have that sarcastic sense of humor, they walk away wondering if you're being serious with them or not. And if they have a struggle with their own self-esteem, they just validate that, you know, that what you said to them you really meant, but you just said it jokingly. And so I'm like, "I'm really sorry I hurt your feelings." And so we had this conversation about that, and I was like, "Yeah, I've heard that before. I'm really sorry." And then that night I went home, and about 3 o'clock that next morning, I woke up just out of a dead sleep, and 3:30, and with this verse going through my mind. And at the time, I didn't know where that verse was, but I knew it was in Proverbs because I used to read the Proverbs every day for many years. And it says this, it says there's 3 things in which the world can't hold up under, 4 things in which the earth quakes. And one of them is when a pauper becomes a king. And so this verse was just going through my mind that the earth cannot hold up under a pauper when he becomes a king. So just out of a dead sleep, I just woke up and that verse was just running through my mind. I didn't know where it was, but I knew it was in the Proverbs. And just that one part of the verse, the earth can't hold up under a pauper when he becomes a king. And instantly, as I started to come awake, that encounter with Nancy and the day before was kind of like in my mind. And the Lord said to me, "Do you know why the world can't hold up under a pauper when he becomes a king?" And I said, "No, but I bet you're going to tell me." He said, "Because when a pauper is raised. A pauper is raised to feel like he's insignificant, that he doesn't have a real purpose, and that no one listens to him. And when he becomes a king, he's not careful about what he says or the way he carries himself, because he still feels that he's insignificant. Even though he's significant outside, he's not significant inside. And the reason why the world can't hold up under that is because he destroys the very thing he's supposed to be building. And the Lord started to talk to me, you need to get a new way of thinking. And this is really powerful to me. Now I've shared it 3 or 4 times, and it doesn't have the emotional impact on me, but I'm trying to walk through it, and you can tell the struggle I'm having just on a serious note, in my joking about banning. But that sort of thing is the very thing God's working on me. And so let me just kind of give you a little history about my life. Lots of you have heard my testimony in pieces and parts, and I'm not going to give you my whole testimony tonight. But just for the purpose to let you know that what God's speaking to me and how that relates to you. My father drowned when I was 3. My mother remarried when I was 5 years old. And my stepfather, I had 2 stepfathers. My first stepfather was in our house for 8 years. He made it very clear to me, not so much verbally, but he made it very clear, I married your mother and I did not marry you. I bought the field, and that's you, so that I could have the treasure. That's your mother. And you do really well if you stay out of the way, be quiet, and the other thing is, both my stepfathers were very jealous, so anytime my mother gave us affection or attention, my stepfather, that would just make it worse. So it was an unwritten law. The law of the jungle in my house was stay out of the way, make yourself be as quiet as you could. And we were sharing today at dinner just some of our stories back and forth, Danny and some of the people today at lunch. I'd walk in the house, and the first thing you would do, and as a teenager, I'd walk in the house and I would try to see where my father was sitting, because that's the room you didn't go in. And our house had it was an old house, and it had those doors you could have. It had these double doors where you could, had 2 doors where you could go through all the way around. And so I'd walk in there, and the first thing I'd do is where's he at? And if he was in this room, you went the other. You just spent your time trying to stay out of the way. And I often felt like, insignificant. The word insignificant would probably describe my mentality. Like, no one's listening to me. And in order because there was a lot of pain in my family, is anyone relating to this tonight? Some of you. Because there was a lot of pain in my family, kind of in order to, as a tool to get past the pain, you made things funny that aren't funny. My first stepfather was an alcoholic, and he was a pretty nice guy when he wasn't drinking, but when he was drinking, he was very violent. And so he would break things and yell and scream and knock windows out. And my second stepfather wasn't an alcoholic; he was just violent. And he had a crazy thing about him in that the things that he'd get mad about were not things that you would think people get mad about. So it wasn't like you'd pressure him and he'd get mad. It's like you'd make a comment and it would trigger something in him, and he'd start throwing things and screaming and yelling and breaking things. I've told the story a few times, but the very first time the first memory I have of him was the first day that after him and my mom got off honeymoon. And the 5 of us were sitting around the dinner table, and I made some, my sarcastic sense of humor. I'm sure. I don't remember what I said, but I'm sure it was my sarcastic sense of humor. And he thought I was being, I guess, disrespectful to my mom, and he grabbed the table. We were having spaghetti that night. I'll never forget as long as I live. He grabbed the table, the dining room table that we were all sitting at, and he picked it up and he threw it against the wall. And spaghetti just ran down. It's kind of funny now. It wasn't funny then at all. And we're just sitting there like, the next, I figured that from there, he's going to start killing somebody. Somebody grabs the table and throws it against the wall with, dishes and all on it. with screaming, you think, well, he's going to grab somebody, and this is, we had been raised in a house of violence, but he didn't. He just screamed and yelled and hollered and stomped out and told my mom in a very filthy language to clean this mess up, and went in his bedroom. And didn't see him again for a week. And about 6 or 7, maybe 8 weeks into their marriage, I remember very distinctly that, he was in the front room. And by then I'd already learned, okay, this is the same law of the jungle with the last guy. I kind of got this down. I know you stay out of his way. That's how you survive in this. And he's in the front room, and we had one of those great big televisions that used to have a stereo on top. Remember that? That used to be very popular. And he's trying to adjust it. This is days before cable. You know how that went. He's trying to adjust it to watch something, and we lived on a highway. And he's trying to adjust the TV. It's not working out too good. Next thing I know, I walked into the dining room just in time to look through the door and see him pick up the television set. Console TV. I mean, talking about several 100 pounds. 4 guys kind of a thing. Pick up the set, open the front door first actually, and throw it out on the highway where the cars are. And then I'm standing there I'm 14. I'm like, whoa, the man's got some strength. Needs to get a life. Goes in the bedroom, slams the door. And I can't see what's going on in there, but the next thing I hear is the window crash. And I kind of I wonder what he did. I went outside and looked, and he threw the portable TV through the window. Guess it wouldn't adjust either. Probably didn't realize it was just the channel. I don't know. When you grow up like that, you kind of in order to survive in that, I guess you can survive some other way, but the way that I survived was making things funny that weren't funny. It's kind of you laugh about it, and maybe it's not quite as painful. And what you don't realize that's happening is you're beginning to get an extremely kind of strange and sarcastic sense of humor that people that have been in pain and live in pain kind of connect with you and laugh about it because they kind of do the same thing. But people who've grown up, in a normal household, they don't have any idea what you're doing. And I grew up like that for, many, many years in that sort of situation, and not even realizing what had developed in me was a very, a very strange sense of humor. And we, what you did is, Dad comes in and he yells and screams and calls you names, and then you tease each other all week long about those names because it's not very funny, but it's just the way that you kind of take the sting out of what Dad just said to you. And what happens when you come out of that situation is that you're still teasing each other the same way, even though the pain's gone. And it's kind of like a way the enemy uses to spread pain to everybody else. Are you following me? And so I began to develop this, mentality. And, it's very, I hope that you guys can relate to me. It's very difficult to see what you're doing when it's something that develops in your childhood. And especially in, I hope you don't think this arrogantly, but especially when you're not doing it out of an evil heart. There's a whole different thing when you're trying to mess up somebody and you're trying to it's just another thing when it's just the way you joke and tease and kid because that's the way your family teased for survival. And then you kind of bring that into what's supposed to be normal and you sort of wreck a normal environment not because you're trying to hurt someone, because if you ever knew you would hurt someone, it would hurt you. But just because that's the demeanor and that's the kind of survival tool that we picked up someplace in a battle that ended a long time ago, but we sort of didn't realize that it ended. And so I said all that to say that the Lord began to reveal to me that, you know what? I've made you to be a king. Now, when I say I'm a king, it isn't because I'm like the senior associate at Bethel. Because I want to relate to you that you're kings too. I'm going to show you that in a few minutes. So, in other words, what I'm getting at is, you may say, well, you have a real place of responsibility and authority in this church. And that would be true, and I don't want to play that down. I know that that's part of it. But each of you are kings too. And so the Lord said, I've made you to be a king, but you still think like a pauper, and the world can't hold up on you when you think like a pauper, because you inside don't think you're significant, but people outside know you're significant. And so what happens when you're insignificant inside and you're significant outside is that you begin to destroy, and you don't carry yourself like a prince, you carry yourself like a pauper, but people respect you like a prince. And so I have raised you up, and I have given you dignity on the outside, but something needs to happen on the inside so that you stop destroying the very thing and sabotaging the very thing that I've given you. He began to show me about Moses, and I think this is such an awesome thing that God did in the Old Testament. Moses was raised in the house of Pharaoh. And at 3:30 in the morning, the Lord just began to talk to me. He goes, do you know why I had Moses raised in the house of Pharaoh? You remember that? Moses gets put in a basket and Pharaoh's daughter picks him up and so on and so forth. And I said, no. And the Lord said, because a man who's in slavery on the inside cannot free people who are in slavery on the outside. See, like my children, our children, Kathy and my children, we have 4 children. And our children were not raised to be paupers. My children were told through our actions, through our acceptance, the love that Danny was talking about tonight, and through our words, you are important. Your opinion is important. Not only are you important because you're our sons and daughters, but your opinion is important. In our house, and I don't know how your house is, but this worked out pretty good for us. In our house, our children, as they got older, especially as they got to be teenagers, they can share anything they want with us. If we had an opinion, if we said, you know what, you can't go to the football game or whatever, put it in there, blank. And they didn't like that, they were allowed to say, Dad, I don't think that's a good decision. Providing they had the right attitude, they could say anything they wanted to us. Now, once we made a decision, once they argued their case, now when I say argue, I don't like that word. It's not a good word because it kind of stimulates in our minds like there was yelling or disrespect going on. That was never, ever allowed in our house. Yeah, when they presented their case, after they presented their case and we said yes or no, then it was done. And we didn't want to hassle about it. But as they're presenting their case, we're not in no mode. We're not in, you're doing this for nothing because I'm not listening to you anyway mode. Because if you build a trust with your kids and they say, Dad, can I go to such and such place? And you say, no, I don't think so. The only time they're going to present their case is when they think you don't have all the facts, because that's a decision. They think you just made a decision, Dad, that isn't congruent with what you've taught us. So they'll come back and represent their case. Dad, this is it, and this is going to happen, and our whole youth group's going, and did you know that such and such is going to be there, and I've really been ministering to this person, or, we're going to have a lot of fun, or, there's going to be some parents there. It's not going to be at that place that you think, oh, yeah, okay, you can go. Are you following me? But our kids were told through our actions and our value for them, and the fact that, probably like you, all of our kids were interested in our girls. Both of our girls played sports. One of them was a head cheerleader for a couple of years and cheerleader for about 5 or 6 years. And so we went to their cheerleading stuff, and both our boys played basketball and soccer and football, and Shannon played baseball, softball, and we had 4 kids in high school at the same time. See, that's why. Sometimes Kathy and I would have to split up, like, we go, okay, well, you go to those 2 games, you spend an hour, literally, you spend an hour there and then an hour there, and I'll go to these 2. And then sometimes we'd go, okay, now you go to Shannon's baseball game, and then halftime we'll reverse, and I'll go there and you go here. And it was like that. It was really like that. And I can remember being out many nights, 4 nights, just going to their stuff. And well, that speaks volumes to me. It says, you are important to us. I ran track for years. My parents, they never came to anything. Never went to anything. I mean, I understand that some of you had jobs you can't be at every game. I'm just trying to say, my kids weren't raised to be paupers. My kids were told through our actions and through our value for them You're important. My son Jason, most of you know Jason, he goes to school ministry and he hangs out here with his wife and 2 kids. He is our most social one of our children. And he loved to talk and be on the phone and have a social life. And I can remember him, it was all kind of a problem when we were home with 4 teenagers. Like, can I please have the phone? Like, I'd like to have the phone between 6:30 and 7, if that would be all right, if no one minds. I'd like to sign up for that. If you guys can handle that, would be really good. How many parents are relating to this? Like, be really nice. Like, tell your friends not to call between this time because Dad wants to have the phone he's been paying for all month long just for one night. It'd be fine. My son would get on the phone and he would call 8 or 10, and I'm not exaggerating. He'd get on the phone and he would call his friends. You know, and it would never dawn on him that they may not want to hear from him. Seriously, he'd just get on the phone, call his friends. What are you doing? I'm calling my friends. Now, I think oftentimes I would be watching him call his friends, and I would be thinking, because in that social thing, that he got that from Dad. Dad liked it. But you know what? Dad was the kid in high school who sat at home hoping someone would call him. You know why? Because I was raised to be insignificant, and I thought, you know, if I call somebody, they're not going to want to talk to me. But it would never dawn on my son to think, well, who's not going to want to hear from me? I'm an awesome guy. My parents love me, and I'm just, not in an arrogant way, but it would never, honestly, it would be a shock to him if someone rejected him or any of our kids. They would be like, well, how could they not like somebody like me? Are you flowing with me? My son, there's not arrogance on my kids. There's just a confidence. There's like, I'm loved. I have good self-esteem. I don't think of myself more highly than I ought to think, but I do think is to have sound judgment. And I think I'm a nice guy. I like me. And because I like me, sure, everyone else would like me. Why wouldn't they? I'm a good friend. And and of course, like all of us, I think in this room, we learn that friendship is giving, and our kids learn that when you're in a relationship, that it's first of all for them and then it's for you. And so why wouldn't somebody want me in their life? I was the other side of that. I was like, no one's going to want me in their life. I mean, hey, my dad doesn't want me around. Why would anyone else want me around? And that so develops a mentality when you're raised to be a pauper. Now let me take it back to Moses. Follow this for a second. Moses is not raised by his parents because they're slaves. He's raised in Pharaoh's house as a prince. Got me? As one of Pharaoh's sons. So he's a prince in the house. And think about his response to us seems so strange until you realize that princes are used to being honored and valued. And all of a sudden, he comes into this place where he sees 2 Egyptians fighting. He's already beginning to get this deliverance thing on him, thinking, you know what, these people, they shouldn't be treated like this. I mean, you don't treat valuable people like this. And so he goes in and he kills the Egyptian, remember that? And buries him. And then he sees 2 brothers fighting, and he says, hey, what are you guys doing? And they say to him, oh, are you going to kill us too? And it stuns him. I mean, can you imagine? It stuns him. Why? Because he's never been rejected before. Somebody doesn't like me? He's so stunned. Get this. He doesn't just leave. He runs out in the wilderness for 40 years. I mean, that's like... And it says this about him. You got to kind of read between the lines a little bit. But it says of Moses, it says, he thought that his brothers would understand what he was doing. Why? Because everybody else did. In other words, what I'm getting at is this. Moses was not a slave in his heart. He was a free man. And I'm going to tell you something. You may not agree with this, but I believe that Pharaoh did most of the training to make Moses the leader that he needed to be in his childhood. I believe when the Bible says, and when Moses was raised in all of Pharaoh's house and all of Pharaoh's learning, that, yeah, he learned some things he shouldn't have learned, but he was valued in a way that he needed to be valued, and he wouldn't have done that working some millstone somewhere. that he was free inside, and that's the reason why he was free inside, and that's the reason why it bothered him that other people were in slavery, because he was experiencing freedom, and he wanted them to experience freedom. There's a lot of us that are trying to free people, but we haven't freed ourselves yet. We're living in some old cave, the stones rolled away, but we're just hung out in there. Seriously, I mean, we're not in slavery because our stepfather's still, we're still going home to our stepfather. He's gone. But somehow the door of the cage is open, but we just never left. And I want to go back to this thing, we get saved when we believe in Jesus, but we get sanctified when we believe like Jesus. And I'm going to tell you something. When people would share some of the scriptures that I'm going to share with you tonight, it would raise up this thing in me. Now, I thought it was discernment, but now I realize it was the demon living close by my house. You mean, you're demonized? No, I mean, how the enemy... You know what the spirit of a Leviathan is? Leviathan means to fold or to twist. And Leviathan means, the spirit of Leviathan does this. Someone says, I love you, and you think, what do they want? Someone says, I'd like you to come over my house, and you think there's an Amway meeting. In other words, you follow me for a minute, because I'm being serious. That's happened to me many times, by the way. It's not funny. Not funny when somebody, this is what I mean. If you got a meeting, no problem, whatever your thing is. But it's not funny to act like you value someone, then find out you're just using them. It's not funny, especially when you're young. I had it happen to me 3 times. It's not funny when you show an interest in someone for 2 or 3 weeks and then I find out they just want to use me. Just tell me that you want me to work for you and I can handle that, but don't tell me you love me so you can get something from me. But that spirit of Leviathan says, you know what, that was an awesome sermon, and I think, yeah, well, everyone says that. In other words, not everyone says that like, yeah, I know it is, but like, you're just saying that. Doesn't feel real. Are you following me? Somebody says you look nice in that dress, and you think, oh, they didn't like the last 4 I wore. Well, all of you that have experienced this know exactly what I'm talking about, right? I mean, it's kind of funny, but it's not funny when you're experiencing it. And it doesn't matter what kind of compliment that you get or what value is shown you. Because you're a slave, slaves are not supposed to be liked. And so it never feels real. And the voice comes to you and you hear the words, but something else is actually spoken to you. And it's kind of crazy, but the nicer people are, when you have that spirit on you, the worse it gets. It feels like all kinds of words. And then to make things worse, just to kind of tell you how my life has worked, and probably yours too, there's always somebody who really doesn't mean it. There's always enough validation around the corner where somebody is trying to use you that it's just enough to say, these other 4 people, they were too. They just didn't get that far. And I began to put walls up where, I can't be helped. I'm in this cave. Like Isaiah talks about, there's nobody to say, give me back. There's no one to say, give them back, because the more someone tries to help me, the deeper I go into the cave thinking, what do they want? Why would they want me? Why would they value me? I don't value me, so why would you? And I'm going to tell you something. That whole way of thinking is stinking. It's stinking up the place. You're stinking up the palace. I'm stinking up the palace with that. We were sharing this. Actually, the very next day after this whole thing happened at night, I woke up and, of course, I was anxious to share it with the people that are important in my life. And so it was the school ministry staff meeting, and we were talking about it and sharing it, and just turned on a bunch of lights, and other people were like, oh, that's happening to me too, and this thing, and everybody had a piece, and we started getting real, some synergy going, And then we got done with that conversation and we started, it was, we were on to something else a half an hour later and we started joking with each other. And we're like, yeah, where'd you get that stupid looking drip? Well, that is, don't worry about that. We're about 20 minutes of just teasing and joking, and we always do it. And we really have a great relationship on the staff team. And Danny looks up and he goes, do you realize that we're doing the very thing that you just talked about? He said, we're like a bunch of paupers in a cesspool. And we're just making each other we're making ourselves feel good by pushing the other person down. By making fun of the other person, we're trying to validate who we are. And when you hang around with a bunch of paupers, the way that you get self-esteem is by making someone else feel stupid. Do you know that? And you kind of do it like, I can look back and realize that I made my dad feel stupid in my mind. So listen, let me tell you how this works. This is pretty simple, really. You can probably figure it out, but just so it's verbalized. If you got somebody who's supposed to be really important in your life and he acts like an idiot or she acts like an idiot, then you know what? You really want them to be an idiot because that way it doesn't hurt as bad when they act like one. Do you know what I'm saying? So, if you say, it's very difficult when your dad's acting like a total fool and doing a lot of destructive stuff to say, you're really important in my life. I really have a deep respect for you. Come on. I mean, if I create a deep respect for someone that wholly keeps destroying things, guess what? I'm going to give him a sword that he's going to destroy with. So what I end up doing is, in my mind, I'm talking about in my mind, in my house, you wouldn't talk back to my dad, you end up dead. You just joke with him, you end up wounded. Police were at our house a few times. My sister jumped through the window, my dad chasing her. It was nuts. But you end up in your mind going, that guy's an idiot, he's a fool, he's, whatever your words you use in your mind. And you just begin to tear, after he gets done, like, knocked my door down in my bedroom because I slammed it once, poured a gallon of water on me because I didn't get up on time, and the stories just go on and on. When he leaves, you go, oh, that guy, there's other words when you're not saved, that you say out loud, not to him, but to yourself. And what you're really saying is, it didn't hurt as bad because I do not value you. But what happens is that when people are really valuable in your life, you're still doing that. You still got this thing going on with people. And, and Danny said, it's kind of funny, but it's not funny. We're like a bunch of paupers in here making fun of each other. Do you notice that? And I'm like, everybody, even him, he was joking with us. And we're like, yeah, we all stopped and we're like, that's not funny, is it? We're like, well, yeah, it is kind of, but it's not supposed to be. Jesus, let's start over. Well, it was Jesus actually. When God speaks to Moses and he goes, Moses, I got a strategy to let these people go free. Here it is, baby. Put your hand in here. Pull it out. Ha! Oh, don't worry, we're going to fix that. Put her back in. Thank you, God. Yeah, you're going to do some of that. And what you got in your hand? Stick. We'll throw it down. Turns into a snake. Yeah! Grab it by the tail. Is there anybody else up there? That had to be wild with God. It's like, pick it up by the tail. Hello. No way. Picks it up, becomes a staff again, Wow, that's freaky, God. So God's all, hey, I got this strategy. We're going to get these people free and we're going to do some miracles. It's going to be awesome. Moses all, well, who should I say sent me? Because, realize he's raised in the house of Pharaoh. Pharaoh's worshiping all these gods. And Moses, he's not a theologian. There is no theology yet. And you got to know, he meets God in a bush, and he's like, bush, Did Pharaoh ever worship a god in the bush? You're the bush god. Who should I say sent me? The bush god says... think about it. He's got a problem. He's like, this is his first encounter with God. You went to read the book, thousands of years later. He's got a problem. He's like, okay, I can do all this stuff, but when Moses said, who gave you this stuff, the stick and the thing and all? What should I say your name is? He says, tell him I am sent you. Dang, Lord, come on. Your real name. I am that I am. Well, that'll help. Yeah. Thank you. Hope the miracles work, because obviously articulating this is not going to go too well. Which God sent you? I am. Who? I said, I am that I am. Moses, get out of here. I thought about that, like, God, you could choose any name. Think about all the names God gave himself in the Bible. And, he's got to give Moses his first encounter. He's got to give him some weird name like I am. And then Jesus later on, the Pharisees, you know why they wanted to kill Jesus? I don't know if you realize this, but in the Greek, they said, who are you? He said, I am. I am that I am. That's why they got mad at him. They're like, oh, you're the guy who spoke to Moses in the bush. And he's like, I am. And I started thinking about it like, now, let me ask you a question, God. Why did you say that to Moses? Why make matters worse? And God says, because I never do anything apart from who I am. See, God doesn't just deliver. He's the deliverer. And God doesn't just save. He's the Savior. Hey, let me give you another one. God doesn't just love. He is love. In other words, here's what I'm getting at. Everything God does is a personification or a manifestation of who God is. In other words, if you get a miracle in your life, you can grab onto that rope, and if you follow it all the way to God, you'll come right to His heart, because you got healed not because He wanted to heal you, but because He is the healer. In other words, everything God did came from who God was. So God's saying to Moses, Moses, when you go to Pharaoh and he says, who sent you? I'm about to do miracles. And when you can follow these miracles all the way into a personal relationship. Did you get that? See, a lot of us do actions that aren't related to who we are. Jesus called the Pharisees and scribes hypocrites. It wasn't because they were doing bad things. It was because they were doing good things, but they didn't have a good heart. And the word hypocrite means actor. It means you're acting in a way that isn't congruent with your person. Are you following me? Are you getting this? When Jesus tells us these signs will follow those who believe, those aren't things that we do. Those things come out of who we are. Here's what I'm getting at. You know why sickness needs to leave when you pray? Because you're a king and that thing has invaded your territory. You didn't get that. See, listen. The kingdom of God does not include sickness or disease or mental illness or broken relationships or poverty or, the list goes on and on and on. It doesn't include those things, and you've been given authority. And the reason why you've been given authority, listen to this. You've been given authority because of your identity. He says in Revelations 1, I'm making you kings and priests. The reason why you have authority, not a pauper with authority, you are a prince with authority. You are a princess with authority. The reason why you have authority is because it's congruent with who you are. And when you pray for somebody and they're sick, you're supposed to, listen, you're a prince and you've been sent by the king to go out and make sure that territory is taken. And so that when a person is especially when a person's a Christian and they're sick, somebody has invaded the king's territory. So when you pray for someone and you say, in the name of Jesus, be healed, you're saying, listen, the king has sent me out. That's why I've come in his name. Like Christopher Columbus came in the name of the Spanish queen, Queen Elizabeth, right? He came in her name. Why? Because she sent him. He's apostled. He was sent by her. Listen, you're apostled. You're sent by the Father. And the reason why you have authority is because of your identity. Your identity is in God. So when you pray, and people get healed, they can follow it all the way back to you, and they can follow you all the way back to God. Therefore, every miracle is an invitation into God's person. And if it isn't, then you're a hypocrite. Hypocrisy is when you act outside of your person. Are you getting this? Let me give you another example. Do you remember the man at the Gadarenes? Man at the Gadarenes. Remember that the man named Legion? Jesus gets out of the boat, and a man met him from the tombs. Remember that? Well, it's very interesting because in Mark 5, and you can look this up, I'm just going to tell you the story. In Mark chapter 5, it says that a man met Jesus from the tombs. In Luke 8, it says a man met Jesus who was in the tombs. But an interesting thing, in Matthew chapter 8, it says 2 men from the Gadarenes met Jesus at the tombs. Now, I don't know what you do with that, but for years, when I tried to read the Synoptic Gospels, where they compare one gospel story to another, it always has bothered me that 2 Gospels say 1 man came and another Gospel says 2 men came. And then I realized why they were at the tombs, why Jesus had the man at the Gadarenes at the tomb, and how come there was 2 men, but there was really only 1 man. Because the tombs is the place for burial and for resurrection. So there was 2 men. One needed to die, and the other needed to be raised from the dead. Are you following me? There was the old man, and it's a perfect place to meet Jesus at the tombs, because that's what we do when we do baptisms. You meet Jesus at the tomb. The old man dies, and the new man leaves. It's interesting because it only records 1 man following Jesus, not 2. Because 1 man stayed at the tombs, and the other man was raised from the dead. Listen, the old man, God's not trying to fix him. That Chris that had all those problems with his dad, he's not supposed to be remodeled. He's dead. I don't know. My wife likes to watch this what do you call that? Home House Network. And they have all this before and after. Well, this would be your before. Before would be like this old haggard looking house, windows are all broke out, roof's falling in. That was you. But after would just be a whole new house. There would be your property would be ripped down and you would be there. Brand new place. He's not remodeling you. He tore you down and started over. You see what I'm getting at? I'm trying to say that old man, when the devil tells you, you know what, remember you did this, remember that, that's somebody else. That guy is dead. There's only 1 man that's supposed to be following Jesus out of the tombs, not 2. Just 1. There's 2 men that were in you, but 1 is dead and the other one is alive. But somehow the old man, with some of us, got to come along. So 2 men met him at the tombs, but 2 men left with him to follow him. And 1 isn't supposed to follow him because he's supposed to be dead. That's why we met him at the tombs. Are you with me? We don't want a healing. We want a resurrection. Let me tell you another thing. You know the difference between condemnation and conviction? Condemnation connects your sin with your identity. And it says, you know why you sin? Because you're a sinner. You know why you lied? Because you're a liar. You know why you were mean to that person? Because you're a bad person. You always do this. Get this. You always. Whenever you hear always, not Jesus. Because Jesus don't know always, because when you ask for forgiveness, he goes, what? You say, Jesus, I'm sorry for what I did today and that thing I did last week and last month, and oh God, I got a pattern of this. He goes, no, in my book you don't. I don't see no pattern here. But condemnation connects your identity with your sinful actions. And it says, you are a sinner, that's why you sin. This sin is congruent with your nature. But conviction says, son, you're way too good to be acting like that. See, conviction says, son, why did you act like a pauper when you were a king? Why are you acting like that? That is incongruent with your nature. And conviction says, you need to stop that because that's not who you are. So, conviction connects my kingship with my conviction. And it says that you shouldn't be doing that. Kings don't act like that. Princesses and queens don't act like that. You're a queen, you don't act like that. What are you dragging around that old shirt for? Why aren't you dressed up? You're supposed to be on a throne. People are here to see the queen. What are you looking like that for? You're the queen. But condemnation says, why are you all dressed up in that queen suit when you act like that? If you're gonna, you know what? You should be wearing those holy old Levi's and that old beat up t-shirt because that's who you are. Look what you did. Well, no, I'm better than that. No, you're not, because remember you did it 8 times. Therefore, how could you tell yourself that you are a queen, you are a king, because your behavior says you're a pauper? You must be a pauper because I got evidence against you. And condemnation piles up as evidence that never gets forgotten. But I want to tell you something. If you have that struggle, I've got a really good attorney. And I'll tell you what the attorney does, and this may sound a little funny, but this is absolutely true. The attorney goes to court for you. He absolutely does. I'm going to show you in a minute a court case in heaven. He goes to court for you and he says, Father, you remember we knighted him back here? We knighted her back here. Remember that? She's one of us. Remember that we adopted her, we adopted him, and we put him in the royal family. And then we grew up, and when they grow up, we commissioned them. Father, I'm sorry for their behavior. Shouldn't have acted like that. I'll talk to them about that. But you can see that they don't belong in with the Egyptians. They don't belong in that slave camp because, see right here, same last name. Christos. Christ, see, right here, Father. So, sorry for their behavior. We're working on that part right now. You can go ahead and release them to my care. I'll take care of that behavior. We're working on it, Dad. Get back to you on that behavior thing, but you can see right here that they're still in training.